Namaste, everyone, and welcome back to our next episode of the EkaShri Schools of Yoga podcast. So, as a reminder, as we've said in the past, the goal of this little discussion between Shriram and myself is to have a set of different practices within the concept of yoga, within the broader field of yoga, that we can take apart, dissect, and talk about a little bit more in a practical and applied aspect to figure out how these different concepts can actually be applied in our day-to-day lives. And so if you have any suggestions on different topics, different content you would like to cover, as always, please, feel free to drop us a line, and we will try our best to go ahead and include these different concepts into our upcoming discussions from here. So today's topic is about the practical and applied aspects of meditation, which is a topic that I think a lot of our yoga students had requested that we cover, to really touch upon the practical aspects of meditation and how to kind of think about the different ways to get started with meditation or refine your existing meditation practice if you already have one. So maybe to start, Shriramji, I think it would be helpful maybe just to level set, if you can maybe briefly discuss what are the main benefits of meditation at a high level, and why should we think about actually adopting the practice for those who maybe don't already have some type of meditation or mindfulness practice built into their daily routine.
Thank you, Vedantji, for setting the stage for the discussion on meditation, and especially the practical aspects of it. It is great to revisit this topic. I know we have recorded a few podcasts in the past where we discussed the same topic, but it is a good idea to revisit again and cover some of the practical aspects, because meditation is such an important practice. And when we introduce the practice of meditation, even if it is just a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes or even 15 minutes a day, it can create profound changes, and it has profound benefits to offer. So let's quickly review some of the benefits of meditation. So the first benefit I would say is that it gives the experience of profound bliss. We feel blissful, especially with the regular practice of meditation. Perhaps on a day-to-day basis, the experiences may shift a little bit. On one day, maybe we experience great inner peace and a great deal of bliss. But perhaps on the next day, the experience is not as great as the previous time, and so forth. So the day-to-day variations you may experience, but the trend, when we keep up with the practice in the long term, the benefits of meditation, the experience of bliss becomes more and more enhanced, more and more powerful, and more consistent. So I would say that is perhaps the primary benefit of meditation. We feel good, we feel at peace with ourselves, and this becomes a consistent experience with the daily practice of meditation. So profound inner bliss. The second benefit I would say is that it conserves energy. So what meditation is we are transforming a turbulent mind to a tranquil mind. So the mind is filled with incessant chatter, continuous flow of thoughts. Mind is usually scattered and it's divided. So when we bring a turbulent mind to a tranquil mind, so all the energy that we previously spent on turbulent thoughts, we are now conserving it. So we feel more energized. During the day, we will feel more energized. We don't feel depleted of energy. We don't feel lethargic during the day. So it conserves energy. And that is another great benefit of meditation. When we talk about conserving energy, I'd also like to point out another related term. I would say it is entropy, which is the chaos or the wear and tear in the system. So with the practice of meditation, what happens is there is less of chaos, there is less of wear and tear in the system. So the aging process, we are putting brakes on it. The wear and tear in the mind and wear and tear in the body, ultimately, because the body reflects the state of the mind. When the mind is tense, then there is more tightness in the muscles of the body. So the wear and tear in the system is less. So we age slower. with the with the regular practice of meditation. So this is another very important thing to keep in mind. It's not just the energy that we are conserving, but it is also the reduction of wear and tear in the system. The next benefit I would highlight is when the mind is in a place of meditation, when the mind is peaceful, we allow ourselves to tap into some of the latent powers of the mind. Sometimes we don't realize the superpowers that we have. For example, the powers of creativity, the powers of intuition, and so forth, that awaken only when the mind is tranquil, and we can access this place when the mind is meditative. So, awakening our highest potential that is lying hidden, that is latent in the mind. As they say, some of the most creative work happens in solitude. So, when the mind is tranquil, when the mind is not disturbed, we have access to this place of creativity and intuition. Next, I would say that we are able to make better decisions from a meditative state of mind. When the mind is uh, the grip of stress or the fight or flight mode all the time, the decisions that we make may not be the highest quality. For example, when we are swept away by the grip of anger, then the words that we say or the actions that we take, later on we come to regret them. So, why get into the trouble of doing activities or speaking words that ultimately we are not very proud of? So, in a meditative state of mind, the actions that we do and the words that we say will be more aligned with who we truly are. In other words, we make better decisions in our life. And lastly, I will point out that when the mind is in a meditative state, mind is very alert. In an alert state of mind, we make less errors. For example, if you are doing any important task, then when the mind is distracted or divided, when it is not in meditation, the actions are more error prone. So when the mind is in meditative state, we make less errors. So these are all some of the benefits of meditation. And of course, there are other overarching benefits of meditations around health. So when the mind is at peace, then there are less ailments in the body that come from stress related issues and psychosomatic issues, as they say. So we are also creating the platform for health and wellness to blossom in our life. So these are some of the examples of benefits of meditation.
No, thank you, Shramji. That's a very comprehensive explanation of the benefits of meditation. And for our, people who are listening who are interested in hearing a little bit more around the specifics, I would refer you back to one of our previous discussions that we've had where we've talked more specifically around the role of meditation. But I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think anyone who's listening to those explanations, Shramji, would definitely agree around the clarity of the mind, the ability to bring peacefulness, the health benefits. I think all of those are definitely in line with what we would expect when it comes to the benefits of meditation. So maybe I think now turning a little bit more to the more practical aspects of meditation. So given that we have these benefits and we know exactly what the benefits of meditation actually are, for those who are beginners when it comes to the whole concept of mindfulness and meditation, how would you recommend that they structure their meditation practice? And I think within that, Shramji, maybe a couple of points to touch upon, maybe when is the best time for someone who's new to the practice of meditation to think about meditating, and for how long? And, does meditation need to be practiced in conjunction with other sets of, yoga practices? So for example, breathing practices or the physical postures, or is it something that we can take independently and then kind of run with independently to get the benefits holistically just from pursuing meditation alone?
Yes, especially when we begin the practice of meditation, when we embark on this journey, it is a good idea to seize the opportunity when the mind is naturally quiet. And the mind is naturally quiet during the twilight times. So during the dawn, when the sun is rising. So at that time, the mind is naturally more quiet. Same thing during the dusk time, around sunset, the mind is naturally quiet. So it is a good idea to seize these opportunities. And of course, if you are unable to practice meditation during those times, it is better to do meditation. It is better to practice meditation at some time during the day rather than not doing it at all. So that is one aspect. What is the best time to meditate? And you can also check with your own self, like what times during the day when the mind becomes naturally more quiet. You can observe the state of the mind at various times during the day. And how to prepare for meditation. So the preparation we can think of as two different sets of preparation. One is, what do we do when we step into the yoga mat or when we step into the seat of meditation? What are some preparations we can do? It is very helpful to prepare the body and prepare the breath for meditation. Doing a few sequence of postures, maybe a few sequence of asanas will be helpful, especially some sequence of postures that promote the alertness in the mind and also to strengthen some of the muscles that support the spine. So, muscles that support the lower back, muscles around the shoulder blades, etc. So that when we sit for meditation for say 10 or 20 minutes, then the body has the strength to support the posture. So we can think of some of these sequence of asanas. One of the sequence that I have found tremendously helpful, both in my own personal practice and when I teach meditation, is a sequence of postures called Padma Sadhana. Padma Sadhana. It is a sequence of 14 postures and it takes about 10 minutes to do this whole sequence. So, a sequence of 14 postures. It is designed very beautifully by Sri Ravi Shankarji, the founder of the Art of Living Foundation. So, he has created this very beautiful sequence that systematically works on all the seven chakras. So, each of these postures, systematically, we move through the seven chakras and it enlivens the entire spinal column so that we feel more alert in the mind and the body is energized and the body also has the strength to sit for a long period of time when we enter meditation. So postures to prepare the body and to make the mind alert, and also a few breathing practices. As we saw in the previous episodes of the podcasts, breathing practices help to transform a clouded mind to a crystal clear mind. So when the mind is feeling dull and lethargic, when we don't change the state of the mind, if we enter meditation with a dull or a lethargic state of mind, perhaps we may fall asleep. And unfortunately, slumber is not meditation. So to make the mind alert, we can do some breathing practices, some pranayamas. And when the mind becomes alert and the mind becomes relaxed, we are easily able to step into meditation. One of the breathing practices that I have found is very, very beneficial to enter meditation is the practice of Kapalabhati, which is perhaps very famous or very popular, popularly practiced in variety of yoga traditions and many yoga studios, many yoga schools. So Kapalabhati, literally the word Kapalabhati means the practice that illumines the mind. Kapala means the head and Bhati is to illuminate. So this practice of Kapalabhati, it transforms a dull state of mind to a very alert state of mind, brilliant mind. It makes the mind more brilliant. That is the literal definition of Kapalabhati. And the practice itself is very easy. I'm not going to talk about the technique of how to do it. There are resources. Best way to do it is to learn from a teacher. It uses active exhalation and passive inhalation. And when we complete the practice of Kapalabhati, what you will notice is that there is a phenomenon that happens at the end of Kapalabhati, which is called Kevala Kumbhaka. Kevala Kumbhaka means spontaneous retention of the breath. Kumbhaka means retention of the breath. Kevala means natural or spontaneous. So when we do, say, 1 or 2 rounds of Kapalabhati, what we discover is at the end of the practice, there is a pause. The breath is suspended for uh, several seconds or even a couple of minutes. If Kapalabhati is in your daily practice, you will notice that for a sufficiently long duration of time, several seconds or even up to a minute or 2 minutes even, the breath stops. And when the breath stops, mind stops, because there is a relationship between the rhythm of the breath and the flow of thoughts in the mind. When the mind is more turbulent, we breathe faster. For example, when the mind is angry, there is a certain pattern of the breath associated with it. When the mind is peaceful, the breath also flows more slowly. You see, there is a relationship between the two. So when the breath stops, then the mind stops. Mind becomes empty of thoughts. So Kapalabhati makes the mind alert. At the same time, the mind is empty of thoughts. You see, this is such a beautiful combination. The mind is alert, yet the mind is peaceful. It is tranquil. And this is the best segue into meditation, because we prepare the mind by entering the practice of meditation with an alert state of mind so that we don't fall asleep, and also with an empty state of mind so that we don't get swept away by the force of thoughts. So these are some of the preparations we can do. A few postures to prepare the body and bring the mind to a place of alertness, and a few pranayamas, such as the Kapalabhati, that prepares the mind to be more tranquil and more alert. And with these preparations, when we sit for meditation, we have done 99% of the work. So when we talk about meditation, the key word is to allow the state of meditation to happen, not to force the state of meditation. That is the difference between the skill to control the mind versus skill to control the body. For example, to do something at the level of the body, if you want to master another yoga posture, then there is effort that is needed. Whereas if we want to make the mind do something, or to bring the mind to a place of tranquility, we cannot do that by force. We need to allow that to happen. So once we create the right environment, when the body is ready, when the breath is ready, and when the mind is ready, the mind is tranquil and the mind is alert, then meditation is naturally allowed to happen. It comes naturally. We don't have to force that in our experience. So these are excellent preparations that will help with the practice of meditation.
And I think that last point is a very interesting point you bring up, Shriramji, about the fact that you can do all the practices, but then you cannot really force that state of, ultimate state of mindfulness, right? It's something that has to naturally, I guess, you feel transcended into, or you kind of gradually progress into. So I think that's something that, are obviously anyone who's starting a beginning meditation practice should not feel discouraged from the get-go, because that is something that I think you only really develop with time, right? And so initially, it's a little counterintuitive, because you ultimately think you need to achieve that particular state of meditation by the end of your practices, right? But then the real irony here is that you shouldn't go out trying to achieve it, because this should happen, automatically, and something you should progress into. So I just think that that's a very nice, subtle point that you bring out that is, I think, important for our listeners here to really understand and take grasp of, because that ultimately will help, I think, separate what becomes a really great practice from just a good practice, or maybe a practice that doesn't ultimately achieve its aim at all. So that is great, Shriramji. So thanks for bringing up that subtlety. So maybe taking this into a little bit more concrete manner, I think we touched upon various different practices here and there that are good from the meditation side, but what would be helpful, Shriramji, is maybe if you could hypothetically put together a set of practices, like assuming someone, let's just say, had 20 minutes during the day, maybe in the morning before work or before their other daily commitments start. What would you recommend that they do? Because I think a lot of our students, as well as just broadly people who are interested in meditation, have interest, but they're not sure on what specific practices, may be good to actually follow from a beginner's perspective. So, under those parameters, what would you, maybe if you were to put together a hypothetical curriculum, what would you potentially recommend from a meditation side that our, listeners could potentially follow?
So ideally, it is a good idea to dedicate about 15 to 20 minutes for the core practice of meditation. And then around that 15 to 20 minutes, introduce the preparatory postures and the breath work. Say we devote 10 minutes for the practice of postures and maybe 5 minutes for the practice of breath work. So in total, we have about half an hour or 35 minutes of practice. So 15 to 20 minutes of meditation, 10 minutes of postures, and 5 minutes of breath work, which could include practices like Kapalabhati, etc. So within this half an hour or 35 minutes, we first create the right conditions using the postures and the breath work for the entry point into meditation. So what do we do? Once we do the postures and once we complete our breath work, what are some of the uh, practices of meditation? Now, in the yoga literature, there are a variety of methods, literally dozens of methods. In fact, there is one text called Vijnana Bhairava that talks about 112 different techniques of meditation. And there are a variety of techniques because depending on the nature of the individual's mind, where the mind is caught up, and the nature of the mind, perhaps different techniques will work better than others. So we'll have to try out a few techniques. It's like a buffet of choices that we have in front of us, and exercise some of those choices to see what practice resonates with me the best. What practice or what technique brings the deepest experience of meditation. Now, in the Yoga Sutras, for example, Patanjali says, Yathavimata Dhyanadva. That means pick any method of meditation that works for you. Now, having said that, what are some of the beginning or the entry point meditations that anyone can do? What are some of the simple techniques that anyone can do? One of the meditation techniques is to simply be a witness of the breathing. Just simply watch the in breath and the out breath. Simply be a witness, watching the rhythm of the breathing in and breathing out. Now, whenever we ask the mind to watch the same phenomenon, such as the breathing, in due course of time, maybe in a few seconds or in a minute or 2 minutes, the mind will start wandering or drifting away. Whenever the mind drifts away, bring the mind back to the practice. Bring the mind back to the breath. Keep observing the breath. And in a few moments, you will discover the mind it has jumped elsewhere. Again, do the same thing. Like mechanically, you bring the mind back again and again without complaining, without feeling guilty about it. Oh, I've been doing meditation for so many months, yet the mind is wandering. It is drifting away. It is not listening to me. Don't entertain this kind of thought. Do not feel dejected that the mind is drifting away from the practice because it is the nature of the mind. It takes some time, slowly, steadily, with consistent practice. It takes some time, maybe several months or even a year or 2 years, to gradually quiet the mind so that it doesn't get swept away by the force of thoughts. So we do this mechanically. When we catch the mind going elsewhere, simply bring the mind back to the practice. Bring the mind back to watching the breath. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is said, Yato yato nischarati manaschanchalamasthiram tatastato niyam yetad atmani eva vasham nayet. In this verse, so this technique is mentioned, namely, whenever you catch the mind or wherever you catch the mind going away from your practice, bring the mind back again and again, back to the practice. Bring the mind back to the self. Be a witness and keep watching the breath. So you can do this as one of the meditation techniques. And in fact, when we use the word doing meditation, that itself is an oxymoron, because meditation is not doing. So I have to be careful when I say let's practice meditation. So that is more accurate than to say doing meditation. So the mind drifting away is a natural phenomenon. That is the nature of the mind. So we bring it back again and again to the breath. Another thing that can happen is when we keep watching the breath, boredom can take place. The mind could get bored. But that boredom is something we have to pierce through. It is like a learning curve that we have to get over. And the mind, because we have entertained the mind to be extroverted all these years, so it doesn't like to be in one place and simply watch the same thing, watching the breath. So the mind may resist this practice. Mind may get bored. But we simply go through that experience, simply watch, and slowly, in due course of time, that boredom gets transformed, especially when we start experiencing the bliss of meditation. When we experience that tranquility, that inner peace, then we discover, wow, this is such an amazing practice. And the boredom simply disappears because we look forward to the practice now. Oh, I want to enter that place of meditation. We enter the practice of meditation with enthusiasm now, not boredom. We have crossed that barrier of boredom, and now there is enthusiasm. There is an feeling that yes, I need to practice meditation today. So that enthusiasm will naturally arise with the consistent practice of meditation. Now, this practice where we observe the breath, it uses the principle that the pratyaya, you may remember the definition of meditation that we saw in one of the previous podcasts. The definition of meditation is that the pratyaya means the scenery in the mind, the snapshot of whatever the witness within is observing in the screen of the mind. So that is pratyaya. Meditation is that state of the mind where the pratyaya, the scenery in the mind, doesn't change from one moment to the next. It doesn't change. It is not turbulent. So from one moment to the next, it is the same scenery that presents in the mind. So we are using the breath to create the same pratyaya, the same scenery in the mind. Because the breath happens all the time. The breath is there with you every moment. And when we bring the mind back to the breath, we are creating that same scenery in the mind. Now, once we get comfortable with this practice, we can use other aspects to bring the mind towards. For example, the use of sound, such as mantras, like a bija mantra, seed mantra, where we repeat that mantra again and again in the mind. So initially we were using the breath, but with the mantra, we are using an object which is subtler than the breath. Breath you can feel the breath. Whereas the mantra in the mind is more subtle. You can feel it only in the mind. You cannot feel it physically. You see, unless we chant out the mantra loud. But here in meditation, we chant the mantra in the mind. So it's called the unstuck sound, anahata nada. So unstuck sound. The mind is constantly repeating that mantra. So that is also another practice. And in the tradition of yoga, a teacher gives the mantra. What mantra should the student use? So the teacher uh, will have the will assess the nature of the student's mind. Okay, for you this mantra is the most helpful, and they will give the diksha. Diksha is the giving of that mantra, that initiation of the mantra, and they use that mantra to go deeper and deeper in meditation. So these are some of the uh, couple of meditation techniques. One is the breathing, watching the breath, and another is the use of mantra. In Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, he suggests one of the mantras, the mantra Om. Tasya vachaka pranavaha tajjapas tadartha bhavanam. Japa, the repeated use of that mantra, Om mantra in the mind. That is also one way to step into meditation. So these are some of the techniques, couple of techniques that I've mentioned about how to enter and experience the meditation. Now, going back to one of the earlier points, so we saw that in our 30 to 35 minutes of practice, we have the postures, the breath work, and then meditation. I should also mention that how we conduct our life during the day also has a very significant impact on the practice of meditation. For example, if we overeat and if we sit for meditation, perhaps the mind becomes more lethargic. Or if we eat too much spicy food, then the mind has a tendency to be more turbulent. There is more rajoguna, rajas happens in the mind. So what we eat, how we act during the day, what are our actions, have we been a couch potato during the day? If we are too lazy during the day, that laziness will continue in the practice of meditation. Or if we have transgressed the boundaries of ethics, say yamas and niyamas, say if you have hurt another person, or if you have not been honest, etc. When we are strayed away from our inner values, then that might cause a little resistance during meditation. And especially with continued practice of meditation, we become so sensitive. Even a small white lie, as they say, if we utter a white lie, it might be very sharp. Uh, uh, it might show up in our meditation practice. So, how we conduct our life, living a life of integrity, all this also plays a very crucial role in our meditation practice. And the good news is, with continued practice of meditation, it becomes easier. Our natural tendency is to live a life where we don't hurt others. The practice of ahimsa, satya, etc. It comes naturally as well. They go hand in hand. So that brings one more benefit of meditation, namely that with continued practice of meditation, we become more finely tuned with our own inner values. All of us want to be joyful uh, and healthy and courageous and helping others, to serve others, etc. And with the practice of meditation, our actions align with these values.
No, I think that's a very comprehensive response, and that I think hopefully gives a lot of different parameters and dimensions to really think about, to just really think about the practice of Shriram. And I think you've touched upon a lot of the questions that I had coming up in terms of, right, motivation around the practice. How do we think about stringing together the list of different practices and why those practices make sense? So I think this makes a lot of sense. I think one point to maybe delve a little bit into Shriramji, I think that's interesting, from a practical perspective that we quickly touched upon here, was the fact that, over time, you will be able to get into that meditative state and it'll feel a lot more natural. You won't feel like your mind is distracted and stuff. But just for that initial, time window until you actually hit that point, how should someone think about being, keeping the motivation up? Like, for example, if I start meditating tomorrow and I'm brand new to the practice and, I sit down, but then my mind is all over the place. I'm thinking about 50 different things. The next day, it's the same thing, right? And then you're not going to see that change or that quietening of the mind for a long time. So how in that period how should we think about motivation there to continue and keep up with the practice?
Yes, that's an excellent point. If we don't see any evidence that the mind is quieting down, it doesn't mean that the meditation practice on that day did not work. It's not like that at all. In fact, there are a lot of changes that are happening inside that is perhaps not very visible. It's not very evident. So there are changes that are happening and we just trust the process. So in the practice of yoga, this is called Shraddha. Shraddha, the Sanskrit word Shraddha means trusting the process. Even though I'm not seeing any evidence of it, I know that there is some inner transformation that is taking place. So we just go with the practice. It's like when we sow the seeds and we have to water and provide nourishment, and we don't see the leaves sprout, we don't see the flowers and the fruits on day one. So it requires a few days of trusting the process. We simply water, we sow the seeds, we keep watering it every day, and after a few days you see the evidence of it. So we simply trust the process. It is like, to give another analogy, when we boil water at 100 degrees C, at boiling point, we see a physical change. The liquid water becomes vapor. But it doesn't mean that there was no change that happened before the water began to boil, because every ounce of heat, every bit of heat that we provide to the water ultimately creates that transformation. So, like that, every little bit of practice of meditation that we do every day, even though we don't see any physical evidence on that particular day, it is building up. It is building up, and slowly, in due course of time, we will see the fruits of this practice. We will see the evidence of this practice. In fact, both the Yoga Sutras as well as in the Bhagavad Gita, we see a couple of places where they talk about how even a little bit of practice of meditation, even a tiny bit of meditation practice, creates space for enormous personal growth. It's so precious. Even a little bit of practice of meditation is very precious. Uh, in the Bhagavad Gita, we see that in the statement, Swalpamapyasya dharmasya trayate mahato bhayat. Swalpamapi, that means even a little bit of practice is very profound. It removes great fear and anxiety. Trayate mahato bhayat, bhaya, fear. Mahato bhayat means great fear. So even a little bit of practice removes great anxiety, great fear from the mind. And Patanjali also, in the Yoga Sutras, he says, Mrudu madhyadi matratva tatopi visheshaha. Mrudu means gentle or very soft practice, little bit of practice. Even a little bit of practice is very special. Mrudu madhyadi matratva tatopi visheshaha uses the word vishesha, means very special. So even a little bit of practice of meditation has extraordinary rewards to offer. And this compounds with time. So it's like compound interest. It is not like a linear progression of the benefits of meditation. We're actually building up on the foundation that we create with our daily practice of meditation. You see? So, for example, today, if we experience X amount of benefit, then after 6 months of practice, it is not just X unit of benefit, it will be 10X unit of benefit, because we are compounding, we are building up on the foundation that we create. So once we remind ourselves of all this, how even a little bit of practice is beneficial, then there is more enthusiasm to practice meditation every day. And just like any other discipline where it requires a regular habit, to create a new habit, it requires a certain discipline. So the mind is not ready, it is not in the habit of taking 20 minutes a day to sit quiet. So there's some resistance. But in order to create any new habit, we just have to do it. We just have to go through with the practice for at least a few days. And then we build up that momentum of that practice. And then it becomes natural. It's like brushing the teeth. We don't uh, have this task, brushing the teeth, in our to-do list every day. It is so automatic now. So like that, the practice of meditation also becomes automatic every day when we build the momentum of the practice. So to build that momentum, it usually takes about 45 days. 45 days of daily practice of meditation. The engine has started. The engine of that habit of meditation has started. We have created enough momentum. And then it takes off. The practice of meditation takes off. We don't have to drag the body to sit for meditation. the body will start cooperating. The body will sit in the yoga mat without any force or without needing to drag the body, and the body and the mind, they cooperate with the practice of meditation.
Wonderful. That's very comprehensive once again, Shriramji. So thanks for sharing that. And I hope that's very valuable to those who are listening to the podcast, because that should hopefully give a, I don't want to use the word incentive, but at least some rationale as to how to keep the practice going until you kind of hit that more steady state, that mature state, right? Where you have that level of ability to just be fully aware of that meditative state, and which will take time to achieve, of course, but you have the ability to figure out, you intellectually understand that you will need to get there at some point, but the only way to get there is through continued practice. And that's not something that timing of when that occurs is not something that's actually in your control. So maybe one last question to end on, Shriramji. I think, and in some capacity, we've touched upon this in a few of the points before, and I think you can kind of infer this from the discussion previously. But maybe if you can just give a 1 minute, explanation of, for anyone who's looking to build or start a meditation practice, what should the personal goal be with that meditation practice, when they're starting out? And as they continue to practice a little bit more, maybe for a couple of months, for a couple of years, and become a little bit more advanced in their practice, how should the goal shift towards where, when they're an advanced practitioner versus a beginning practitioner?
In fact, Bhagavad Gita talks about this. It addresses the same point. How should a beginning student of meditation manage the mind? And once they become an adept, that means with continued practice after several years, say, how should the practice change? I'll just quote that verse. So it's in the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, and Krishna says that Aru Rukshor Muner Yogam Karma Karana Muchyate Yoga Rudhasya Tasyaiva Shamah Karana Muchyate. That means for a Aru Rukshu, that means a beginning student of meditation, for someone who is a novice in meditation, start with karma. Karma means actions, activities. So doing practices such as postures or practices such as pranayama, where there is activity that is involved, engage in actions. And for an adept practitioner, yoga rudha means adept practice. Yoga rudha seva shamah karana muchyate. They can directly go into the inner practices. They don't need that much of preparation. So previously I mentioned, for a 20 minutes of meditation session, devote 10 minutes of asanas and 5 minutes of pranayama, breathing practices. This proportion can change with continued practice. So with daily practice, you will notice it doesn't require too many asanas to bring the mind to a place of tranquility. So the proportion of how much we devote for asanas, pranayama, and meditation, we can change that and make that more. The ratio of the time for meditation will increase for a person who becomes adept, where the mind listens to them. So that is one practice, how it shifts with the continued practice of meditation. Now, there's also another very interesting aspect of meditation that talks about how much should we be extroverted and how much should we be introverted. So when we talk about actions versus actions for a novice versus directly dealing with the mind for an adept practitioner of yoga, here is a key that is used in one of the practices called cyclic meditation. This is a very powerful aspect. What it says is, the mind is like a pendulum. It is vacillating between restless state of mind or incessant thoughts on one side, and on the other side, it becomes peaceful and perhaps lethargic. You see? So between rajas and tamas, it is vacillating. So restless state of mind on one hand, and the other extreme is a dull state or a couch potato state, we can say, where the mind becomes lazy. Now, the principle of one of the techniques called cyclic meditation is, when the mind is dull, stimulate the mind, stimulate the body and the mind. On the other hand, when the mind is restless, allow the mind to relax. You see? So you emphasize the opposite uh, momentum of the mind so that it finds its center. So when the mind is restless, relax the mind. And when the mind is lethargic, stimulate the mind. So there's a verse in one of the classic texts called Mandukya Karika, written by the great Gaudapadacharya, talks about this principle. Laye sambodhaye chittam, vikshiptam shamayet punaha, sakashayam vijaniyat, samapraptam na chalayet. This is the verse from which this practice is derived. What it says is, when the mind is turbulent or restless, allow the mind to relax. But when we go too much in relaxation, when we relax all the time, it becomes lazy. So when the mind becomes lazy, stimulate the mind, stimulate the body, do some activity. So like this, we keep cycling between stimulation and relaxation, and sooner or later, we find the center. We find the center. And when the mind is centered, when the mind is relaxed, yet the mind is alert. So that is the sweet spot of meditation. And this can be powerfully used, whether one is a novice meditation practitioner or an adept meditation practitioner. We can use this principle to center the mind. And I'll also point out when we talk about the different varieties of meditation techniques, it is truly such a rich variety that we see given in the yoga literature. I mentioned about witnessing the breath and the use of the mantras. There are also many, many techniques. For example, visualizing light, the use of light, visualizing light maybe at the point in between the eyebrows or at the heart center, the center of the chest, or in one of the chakras. So visualizing like Jyotishmati meditation. Patanjali gives this practice called Jyotishmati, the light of awareness. That is one way to use light. And in fact, Bhagavad Gita also gives the analogy of light, of how the mind of a meditator, the mind of a yogi, is like a lamp in a windless place. So using light as a way to meditate, using musical sound, nada yoga. Nada means the sound that is filled with life, like a musical note that enlivens the system. So we can use nada, the musical note, as a way to enter meditation as well. So like that, there are so many varieties of meditation techniques. It is just mind blowing, literally mind blowing. When the mind blows, then the mind settles down and we are in a state of meditation. And the point I'm trying to make here is there is something for everybody. There is so much variety of meditation that is given that you will definitely find one that suits you and brings the mind to a place of tranquility.
Wonderful. I think that's a great way to end the discussion, Shriramji. So thanks for all the productive dialogue around the practical aspects of meditation and how we can think about actually including this into our daily routines in some capacity, some way, shape, or form. And I hope that, to the audience who's listening to this, I hope that this is going to be helpful in some way, again, in terms of either helping you start some type of meditation practice to actually see what the benefits are. And for those of you who have already started it, to at least get a better sense of maybe why you should keep up with the practice or how to refine the practice going forward. So with that, maybe we'll go ahead and conclude. But thank you again, Shriramji, for such a wonderful, elaborate discussion around the practical aspects of meditation. I think I personally found it very productive and very enlightening as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Namaste.